Okay, here's your heading for today: geysers, hot springs, and fumaroles. We're kind of talking about miscellaneous freshwater things. You're probably familiar with some of these. Let's go ahead and start with hot springs. Go ahead and write this down. Groundwater that is heated by rock inside the earth. These rocks are heated by the molten lava beneath them. So, we talked about spring and how it is groundwater reaching the surface. Well, this is the same thing, only the groundwater underground is warmed up because the rocks are warm. Remember, the deeper you go into the earth, the warmer it gets. Well, there are some areas where that warmth is pretty close to the surface. If you've ever been to Hot Springs, South Dakota, it's named because they had hot springs. Yellowstone has a lot of volcanic activity going on underneath the surface, and they have lots of hot springs as well. I'm going too fast. Go ahead and pause. A geyser is slightly different. I'd go ahead and write all this down. A hot spring that erupts periodically. Groundwater is surrounded by a region of hot rock. With geysers, basically what happens is the water heats up, and once it heats up so much, some of it turns to steam, and it's got to go somewhere, and it explodes, and it pushes up to the surface. So hot spring kind of bubbles warm water. A geyser is going to heat up, and then explode, kind of like an old school teapot. I don't know if anyone's seen that. Okay, but you boil water, and all of a sudden it starts whistling. Okay, the water got so hot and steam is coming out. Well, it's kind of the same thing with geysers. I read a thing just a couple weeks ago. This is gonna sound dumb. There was a dude at Yellowstone National Park that was arrested for trying to boil a chicken on one of its geysers. And apparently, this doesn't happen all the time, but it has happened in the past. This isn't like really rare that someone tries to cook something on the geysers, which basically it's like boiling water. So it would be able to cook something. So geysers, guys, so this would be a hot spring here, water bubbling up, being heated up by the rock around it, kind of pooling up. Okay, with a geyser, the reservoir is underwater, the area of storage, and it builds up, and then finally it's got to go somewhere. Yellowstone, you don't need to write anything, is known for tons and tons of geysers. You don't need to write this, but Old Faithful, I don't know, I'm sure some of you guys in here have been to Yellowstone and seen Old Faithful. It erupts about every hour to hour and a half. The longer it takes to erupt, the bigger it's going to be. And the longer the eruption lasts, the longer it's going to be between eruptions. So they call it Old Faithful because you can kind of judge when it's going to erupt. Not great pictures. Fumarole, go ahead and write this down. Fumarole. And then go ahead and write the definition. Vents from which volcanic gas escapes into the atmosphere. So it's a vent where hot gases escape the earth. A few years ago, my wife and I went to Yellowstone over Christmas break, and they had a bunch of snow, but there were patches, areas where there was no snow and bright green grass, and everything looked great. It was around the fumaroles. These vents basically gave off warm gases and melted the snow around it, and the grass was growing just fine. It was green and everything because of those warm gases, and it usually smells pretty putrid. Like when we pulled up, it smelled like sulfur. Smelled like someone had been passing gas. That was the gases that were trapped inside the earth. A cave, I'd probably put this down, forms when water dissolves limestone underground. We got some caves out in western South Dakota. Basically got a chunk of limestone, and when water drips on it, it slowly dissolves it, slowly eats it away. Well, if that happens over thousands of years, it's going to carve out some caves. You don't need to write anything, but maybe you've heard of stalactites hanging from the ceiling, stalagmites up, and if it connects, they call it an organ pipe. Kind of similar to icicles. They're melting, they're dripping, and then they freeze. Sinkholes, I'd go ahead and write this down. Place where rocks near the surface are dissolved by water. So it's kind of similar to a cave. That water is going to dissolve rock underneath the surface and create kind of an air bubble, I guess, under the surface, and it will eventually get weak enough and collapse. Out in western South Dakota, there's big news, I think it was this summer. There's a group of houses that were built on this sinkhole. There was this underground mine that caved in that no one knew about. And one of the houses, I think, fell into it or was partially broken up, and these other ones were just sitting there. They had to evacuate them because they didn't know if they were going to fall in also. So a sinkhole where rock is dissolved by water. Just a quick refresher, the names of South Dakota rivers, and this might help you with your assignment. Okay, you got the Big Sioux, you got the Vermilion, the Big James right there. The Missouri goes right through the middle of the state. A White River, Cheyenne, Belle Fourche, Beautiful Fork, Moreau, and Grand. At least 5 of these, maybe more, were answers to your crossword. There you go.